Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. You're not going to believe what I've got for you now. Yes, it is this Furtwängler doing
The ninth.
at the reopening of the Bayreuth Festival. That was what, July 29th, July 1951. This is the same performance which was released by Warner. Only here, it's on BIS. How is this possible, you might say? Well, they explain it to us in the little booklet that comes in the little paper sleeve thing, which is so thin and ecological that it may vanish entirely and biodegrade before you even have a chance to listen to the performance. That might not be a bad thing. Anyway, let's see what they tell us. This is an unabridged concert performance, the opening of the Bayreuth Festival, as broadcast by Bavarian Radio in 1951 and transmitted internationally, including by Swedish radio. Aha! We have chosen to not change anything, not to brush up the sound, not to clean and shorten the pauses, or omit audience noises within the music, but to keep the original as it was. In this way, we recreate the feeling of actually sitting in front of an old radio in 1951, listening to this important concert, thus creating a true historical document. That's the answer. You see, this whole thing is, we're going to be, I think in the next few years, experiencing quite an interesting essay in the ins and outs of international copyright, among other things, because Warner didn't own that recording. They didn't own the broadcast. They owned maybe their version of that recording. I'm not sure. I don't really know. What I do know is that it's owned by Bavarian Radio. Now, Bavarian Radio gave copies, essentially, to everyone in Europe. So there probably is a copy of this thing sitting somewhere in every state-run radio, anything in the world. So if you get permission from that state-run radio thing anywhere in the world, you can release it. And so there may be 20 trillion versions of this performance out there, each one slightly different, each one perhaps a certain number of generations away from the master tape, or each one a dub taken from an air check, from a broadcast, from somewhere, someplace. Who knows? I have no clue. I think it's just fascinating. I really do. And I have to say, straight out, I mean, I'm not going to dog the performance. I'll talk about that in a second. But if I had to choose between who was going to make money on this thing, between Warner and BIS, I'd give it to BIS any day. I mean, God knows, for all the work that they've done, making recordings of music that probably 5 people in the world are going to listen to, I hope they sell 32 trillion of these to all of the Furtwängler people in the world. They should all buy 50 of them. And I hope it keeps BIS going forever, because that's the way the business ought to work. You do the popular stuff and it subsidizes the less popular stuff. But BIS has such dedication and has had such a marvelous track record that I don't care that this is not a very good performance of
The ninth.
because, I mean, what difference does it make? Furtwängler people, actually, tend to regard this as so-so. The Furtwängler people like the Nazi ninth the best, the 1942 one. And the normal people like the Lucerne Festival one the best, because it sounds the best. And that in itself is an interesting sociological phenomenon, because I really wonder, one of the things I can tell you about this is that it is obviously a broadcast air check, and they have not touched it. And as a result of that, it has plenty of static and crackle, and there's sort of a noise base into which the pianissimo moments disappear without a trace. Sometimes you can't even hear them. It sort of goes like... the opening of the symphony or the scherzo. All right, it's not that bad. But there's a lot of static and crackle, and they've just left it in so that you can recreate the fabulous concept of sitting next to your crappy old radio in 1951 and listening to this in poor sound. Why anyone would want to recreate that experience, I don't know. But maybe some people do. Maybe that makes it sound more historical. It actually raises a very interesting question, and that question is this. It seems that the more mystique that accrues about these Furtwängler performances, the mystique depends on how much you cannot hear. In other words, the less you hear, the more mystical it becomes, the more transcendental it must be. When the sound disappears entirely, you've reached the nirvana of Beethovenian Furtwänglerian transcendentalism. Yes, you have. So that means that this performance, because it hasn't been touched up or cleaned up or renovated in any way, is inherently more metaphysically satisfying than the Warner edition. Some people would claim it's more satisfying simply because BIS is an independent label and Warner's a major label and therefore inherently evil. But that's that's not a musical quantity at all, really. But I think that that's a fascinating sort of theory to check out. So I would like all you Furtwängler people to please go by this and confirm that it is actually more transcendental than the Warner performance because it sounds worse. I think that that's just an amazing experiment that we can try, and I have a feeling I know what the result's going to be. So there's no need, frankly, to get into any of the details except to point out that you get a welcome announcement in German, French, English, and Swedish, and then you get the program announcement and applause for the arrival of Furtwängler, and then you get the applause and closing remarks in Swedish and German at the end. And you note in the notes here, they said they haven't taken out any of the pauses. So they haven't taken out any of the pauses between movements or within them. And that's very interesting because, the normal timing for the slow movement in this performance was just shy of 20 minutes. But here, because they've left the pauses in between each variation that Furtwängler interpolated, it takes 27 minutes. I'm just kidding. It's the same tempo. Don't worry. I couldn't resist throwing that one in there. Anyway, here it is.
The ninth.
Conducted by Furtwängler all over again. The performance you've heard a million times on Warner in worse sound, but more of a historical document. And, oh my goodness, so much more metaphysical. I mean, really, the transcendental, aura of this is practically singeing my fingertips. I have to be careful, how I handle it. It's really getting too hot for me. It really is. So keep on listening, folks. And, if you're a Furtwängler person, feel free to get your 1951 opening of Bayreuth, Beethoven's Ninth, in the worst sound it's had yet, which makes it the best version it's ever had yet. And do support BIS anyway. If you don't buy this, because it's like, get something else. But give your money to BIS. They deserve it. Take care.